Howdy, Immortalium here, and welcome to another MVM review. This time I'm reviewing something that is a bit of a big deal. Something that many people never expect to get released in the UK, considering how weird it can be, how it was released, etc, etc. And that is Garden of Sinners, being released by MVM Entertainment. Now, Garden of Sinners. A lot of people have been, hyping this series up for me. I remember, I think it might have been a year ago, I came across a girl from Germany, and, I was talking to her about anime, and she was like, you have to watch Kara no Kyokai, which is the Japanese title for Garden of Sinners. And I was like, oh, I'd never heard of it, so I looked it up. I saw that it had a release in the US, but no release over here, and I was like, oh, I can't get to watch it. But MVM have finally released it, and I was like, oh yes, I'll be able to get to watch this. And did I like it? Well, let's find out. So, let's start off with the story. Now, the first thing I gotta point out about the story, even before I describe what happens, is the way that it's structured, and that is, it is not structured in a chronological order. What I mean by that is, the first film happens later on than where the story begins, if you know what I mean. Like, okay, let's just phrase it this way. Second film is the true beginning, whereas the first film is actually set much later in the series. So many of the films are structured that way, in order to, get us intrigued, to kind of point out certain events that happened before, certain revelations happened in the past, etc., etc. Which actually, interestingly, I thought one of the most interesting things about that structure was that we met the main villain after his defeat, or something like that. It's a very hard thing to describe without going into spoilers. But suffice to say, it's a very interesting structure, and to be honest, actually, it adds a lot of rewatchability to this series, as well as intrigue, etc., etc. Now, let's start off with the actual story. What is this series about, well, it's about a girl called Shiki, and she works for an agency. This agency is run by this woman, Aozaki, and basically they investigate certain supernatural events. So, for example, in the very first film, it's about a string of murders from this particular building. I think it's the Fujo building, I think it is. Anyway, there's a string of murders happening, and there's like a supernatural kind of element to it. There's this other character as well, Kokuto. And Kokuto is kind of the grounded character, like he's the most realistic or normal of them all. But interestingly, despite that, usually, when a character like that is being introduced, or has been introduced, we see almost all of the, perspective from them. Like, for example, Kyo from Haruhi Suzumiya. But instead, the majority of our perspective comes through Shiki, who is the more odd character, let's just put it that way. She's not normal. As I said, I can't really give away too much about the actual characters themselves, considering the fact that this is out of order. So technically, giving you the information from the very beginning is actually a spoiler. Suffice to say, I'll tell you what I think of each one. So Shiki, I like a lot as a lead character. She's a dark character. She has a lot of intrigue about her, a lot of mystery. She is an odd kind of mixture of stoic and emotional. It's a hard kind of way to describe her. Like, quite often she's very deadpan, kind of not very emotional. But there's these kind of brief instances where she suddenly gets a burst of emotion. But it feels very fluid, very clean, and kind of an understandable portion of her character. So overall, she acts as a very good lead to the show. Now, about the character that I found the most problematic, not necessarily because I didn't like her, just I felt that there wasn't enough information given about her, which is Aozaki. Now, Aozaki is, as I said, the one who runs the kind of quote-unquote detective agency, and because of the way that these films were structured, I was expecting to get a lot more information about her. And the rest we do get a bit of information, but not to the point where I would have liked. Now, I did a bit of research on this, and apparently this series, Garden of Sinners, is part of a kind of a pseudo-verse or whatever, combined with you know, Fate, and this other series as well. I can't recall the name. Tsukihime, is that it? I don't know. Something like that. And she's related to one of the characters from these other shows. So I don't know if I was meant to get any more information about her background from another show, but this is the first part of that verse that I've seen. So I would have appreciated a bit more information on the character coming from this series. But suffice to say, all the scenes that she was in, I really liked her as a character. I just would have liked to know a bit more about her and, you know, how she actually, you know, came across these characters, because she does seem to appear out of nowhere in, you know, when she's quote-unquote introduced. And finally we have Kokoto, who is our kind of grounded character, the most normal of them all. In fact, many of the characters in the show like to point out how normal he is in comparison to them. And he's a pretty interesting character. Usually I'm not that keen on these types of characters unless they're, you know, particularly well acted or particularly snarky or something, like Kyon from Haruhi Suzumiya. But Kokoto, despite being not, you know, particularly snarky or anything, and at points actually seeming a bit clingy, he actually advances the story along very well. There are moments which are actually surprises from him, you know, which actually I don't quite often associate with these characters. And he is actually quite a well-developed and engaging character, so I liked him overall. So, from a character perspective, works very well. Now, about the animation. The animation for this series was done by Ufotable. Now, for anyone who is familiar with Ufotable right now, they're most famous, along with this series, for Fate Zero and the currently airing, I think it's currently airing, Fate Stay Night remake. And okay, these films are theatrical films. They were originally released in the theatres, and you can see the increased budget in them. There was a lot of fluidity, there was a lot of cleanliness, but I just want to say that this is an absolutely sumptuous looking series. Now, the first two films I noticed, every so often the characters would be, you know, a little off model, but by the third film, you know, that has been completely rectified, and from then on, there's a fluidity to this. You know, there's very little, you know, kind of stiffness or, you know, lack of animation that is quite often seen in animation. There always seems to be a good bit of movement going on screen. There is a lot of very cool action sequences, but there's even the little moments. You know, the little moments where the characters are simply talking to each other. You know, there's not a lot of like actual kind of camera movement, which is something that you know, we don't see too often in anime, unfortunately. And all these little details, you know, like the way that the kind of raindrops or snowflakes land on the background, etc., which this series is an absolutely lovely looking series, and I can understand why a lot of people were disappointed it didn't get released on Blu-ray in the UK. But suffice to say that this, even on DVD, this series is absolutely great to look at. Now, perhaps my favourite part of the series is the soundtrack. The soundtrack for this is absolutely fantastic. I mean, from the get-go, I was in love with the soundtrack. And even though they don't do the whole soundtrack, the theme song for each film is done by a group called Calafina, who actually, apparently they were made for this series. You know, they came together in order to do the theme songs for these films. But I know them better for doing Magia from Puella Mathematica Magica, which is one of my favourite, you know, musical pieces that I've ever seen in an anime. And they meet the mark. They deliver some amazing theme songs in this series. But besides that, the actual soundtrack for each film is absolutely beautiful. I absolutely love the soundtrack, and I would love to see, you know, an actual soundtrack release of this. Not sure if that'll happen. I suspect that they would have done that in America because of that whole Aniplex thing, but I'll get on to that in a little moment. But suffice to say, I absolutely love the soundtrack, and the soundtrack is one of the big selling points for me. Now, vocal performances, in general, the vocal performances from the Japanese... Oh, I better point this out, actually. There's no English dub. So if you don't want to read subtitles, unfortunately you won't be able to pick this up. But suffice to say that the Japanese performances are in general excellent. There are a couple of characters here and there. In particular, there was this one character in movie number 5, which I didn't like the vocal performance from. But in general, the vocal performances are superb. You know, there's a lot of nuance to them, a lot of emotion behind them, etc., etc. So I like the performances. A couple of issues here and there, but in general, it's an excellent vocal performance from the Japanese seiyuu, and the subtitles are, you know, clean. They give a lot of information. and you know, they're on point. So you know, great subtitles. Now, let's finish off with how MVM is releasing this. So let's start off with how it was released in America, which is that it was released by the, I like to call, infamous Aniplex of America, who charge an inexorbitant amount of money for a lot of their shows. Like, for example, their Cruella Magica releases, I think it was $60 for 4 episodes, which in fairness is better priced than in Japan, but still not a lot of people in the West would be willing to pay that much price. Now, from what I've heard, although this sounds actually a bit higher than I would have expected it to be, even from them, the Garden of Sinners films were $400 in America, which is absolutely huge. Now, there were some complaints on MVM's release. I believe, you know, they're charging like £60 or something, you know, on base.com and Amazon and all that. In comparison to, you know, the American release, that is an absolute steal. And I also want to point out, these are films. So if you just simply look at the fact that these are 8 films, that actually comes out as a pretty good deal. I better point out, actually, the last one isn't necessarily a film, it's an OVA. It's an epilogue that's set after, you know, the whole events of the series. It was released a couple of years later. So I better point out what films get released on this, because there was one film that I thought would get a release, but apparently it didn't. It didn't get released in the big box set that Aniplex America did originally, although I do believe Aniplex America have released it maybe separately or something. Anyway, the films that you get in this are Thanatos and Nothing Heart, Ever Cry Never Life, Garan no Do, Paradox Paradigm, Fairy Tale, Not Nothing Heart, and the Epilogue. So, there are a good variety of them. Now, most of them are, they vary between like 40 to 60 minutes. 2 of them are close to 2 hours long. So you do get a lot of view time for the money you put in. Not only that, but MVM's release, you get, for the collector's edition, or the limited edition, you get a 36-page art booklet, you get the 8 tin packs, and you also get 14 postcards. So you do get some pretty decent extras. On-disc extras, kind of a, you know, what happened in the previous what happened in the previous film, I guess is the best way to put it. So overall, do I recommend this series? It was always intriguing and always fascinating. I believe there was a great deal of rewatchability in this. There were some bits of it that I couldn't quite get into. Some bits felt like they were trying to bite off more than they could chew. But overall, this is a series that is well worth picking up, particularly if you're into, you know, the unusual side of anime. I better also point out there is an enormous amount of blood, violence, rape. There's a film that has rape in it. There's a film that has cannibalism in it. So not for the faint of heart, I will say. And this series well earns its 18 rating from the BBFC. But it is a great series with a lot of fascinating themes, a lot of intriguing characters, and it is well worth picking up. So yeah, that's my review of Garden of Sinners from MVM. As usual with these MVM reviews, I'm going to include some links to some distribution sites that release MVM's products. So if this sounded interesting to you, or if you have had an interest in picking up this series but have been unable to at this point, enter one of those links and pick it up through the distributor. So yeah, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye bye.